It's still too early for this. So tired. Like, oh my goodness. Google Drive, where are you? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. Everybody, it's Kara. I am back for another video. I have a topic bank of, like I said, 52 topics. On Twitter, I did a poll saying, hey, what do you guys want to do? I gave you guys 3 options and everybody pretty much just picked 2. So I had to ask like 2 other people and then we ended up doing villains. Just a heads up, if you guys want to have a say in videos that are coming out, I do the inquiries on Twitter. If you want to have a say in what's coming out, that's pretty much the place to do it. Of all the character types and archetypes that are actually in stories, villain is probably my favorite for a lot of different reasons. But before I really get into all that, I want to tell you guys my blunder story about what happened with my own villain, and I think it's worth telling because you learn from other people's mistakes, and I like to think that mine was a pretty good mistake to make. When I first started writing my book, and after I was done with the 3rd draft, and then I reached out and I found an editor who I knew and trusted, and I sent her the stuff, and then she sent it back, and I read her 3-page feedback, and I had to repeatedly tell myself to not cry. One of the things that she mentioned was that my villain was actually lacking, and by lacking, the villain wasn't actually present. In my brain, I thought I was being quite clever and not having the villain be like, you know, super into the story right away. They were kind of like pulling like the strings like a puppeteer, and you know, they were gonna come out like in the next book. And she came down and she was just like, nope, can't do that. When you get your stuff back from an editor, there's always like the things where it's just like, you know, it's a discussion, you decide if they're right or wrong, but I remember that particular point like really hit me. I took the time, like I pushed the manuscript away and I had like a complete psycho moment. And so there were cue cards everywhere. I had a timeline where one was tracking what my hero was doing than what my villain was doing. By the time I got done with the 7th revision, because that's how many more I had to do after that, I felt a lot more confident with this character and I was a lot more pleased with them. And so I told you all that so in hopes that you will learn from my mistakes. I also did a lot of research. When I say research, I don't mean I ran to Amazon and I grabbed a couple of books. I did some deep diving into psychology, and this was before I was a grad student. I also went into philosophy. I tracked and watched the evolution of villains and antagonists throughout history, starting with classical stories all the way up until Thanos. So having done all that research, I definitely want to share with you the things that I did in order to make my villain, in hopes that you can create your own villain, or at least find, you know, kind of the right direction to go. I gotta have the disclaimer, just because this is what I did doesn't mean that will work for you. My only hope is that my insight and my advice is going to help you create something today very happy with. So having said all that, and I'm done talking about myself, let's go ahead and talk about bad people. Let's go ahead and do a quick history. Villains today are way different than they used to be. That if we go ahead and we look at the cartoons of villains, we used to see some very one-dimensional characters. You know, we had the cartoon guy grabbing the chick, tying her to the railroad, and hoping that the guy was going to save her before the train ran her over, right? Very mustache-twisting evil. Things kind of progressed after that, and then we started having, they were still very one-dimensional, but they were definitely a reflection on what was going on at the time. So if you go look at old cartoons that were happening, we're still sticking with cartoons. If you go and look at some of the media that was happening, a lot of it, like during the Cold War, involved communism, Russians, and basically how America was good and they weren't. And then they continued to evolve after that because we didn't want them to be so one-dimensional. We were adding things like, you know, what is their ideology? Where are they coming from? Why are they doing the things that they're doing? Even if you actually go and you look at some of the classical literature, let's look at Hades and Persephone. At the end of the day, it is like the ultimate love story, origin of spring and things like that. If you go look at the early telling of Hades and Persephone, it was originally like he got bullied into it by, you know, Aphrodite to go take her because she was jealous about how pretty Persephone was, and Hades was like, okay, fine, whatever. Erupts from the ground, grabs her, take her under. You know, that whole story goes over there. Later retellings got a lot more strange. One of the interesting things is that as people became more afraid of death, they started associating evil traits with God, who actually represented death. But in the later recountings, like, you know, Hades saw her and fell in love with her and had to have her and erupted from the ground, raped her on the spot, and then pulled her back down. And I was just like, well, these are 2 very different tellings. If you are a mythology Greek and you think I'm representing that wrong, please feel free to fact check me. My feelings will not be hurt. So we discussed a little bit about the history of villains and kind of like how society has treated them over time. One of the things I do want to talk about is I actually want to talk about evil. And the reason I want to talk about evil is because evil is an ever-changing concept. And there's a book, it's a really thin book, and it's called Evil, a Primer, and it's written by William Hart. So one of the things that William Hart said in the book when it comes to what evil is evil is an intentional human act that causes extreme harm to innocents and attacks based on our moral order at the time. You know, going back to like how villains change over time and how people change them over time to fit whatever's going on. The idea of evil and what makes something evil continues to change. Actually, James Bond films are a really good example about what I'm talking about, because you can kind of see who the moral enemy at the time was. So we started with like the Cold War, and then we had terrorism, and then we had government issues, which kind of represents the concern of the people at the time. There's a lot of different ways to show how somebody's evil. It comes in the way that they represent themselves, the actions that they take, and then the way they treat people. I got a really huge pet peeve right now in literature about showing that somebody's evil, and it's the constant use of rape. Rape is horrible. I'm not going to argue about that or take some weird stance, but the fact that that seems to be like the default thing to do to show that somebody's evil is becoming a serious lack of imagination on the writer's part. And I'm going to let y'all know, as somebody who's traveled across the world and worked in the military, there is some really evil shit out there that people do to each other. So many other things that you guys could be doing right now, and it just seems like everybody's just pigeonholed into this one thing. Like, imagination. We're writers. Come on, guys. So now let's go ahead and we'll get into what you guys really want to hear, which is about how to create your villains. The first thing I have in here when it comes to creating your villain is that however much time you put into your hero, you need to put that much time times 0.5 into your villain. To really look into their background, you have to really decide what's going on with these characters. If you've got like 5 pages about your hero and their background, stuff like that, you better have like 6 pages about your villain, because your story is not about your hero. Your story is about how your hero responds to what the villain is doing. Before you even write your story, you need to figure out what your villain's doing, what actions are they taking, how are they integrating, who's with them, all that stuff. So there's definitely some stuff to consider when you're looking at trying to figure out who these people are, what makes them tick. And one of the things that you guys can take into account is the nature versus nurture element. Were these characters groomed to be evil, or were they just naturally already like this? I see a lot of people typically want to say that they're naturally evil, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just the overuse of it. It honestly doesn't really create a lot of character conflict in terms of like the character arc, because people who were, you know, groomed into being evil or doing evil things, like Kovu from The Lion King, that's a lot more interesting, because you can literally see him like have his, you know, his ideas and his ethics challenged, and he sees that things are different, and he has that conflict about, do I do what I was meant to do, or do I do the thing that I want to do? Is this right or wrong? Like there's a lot in there that can pull a reader in, and it's very engaging, versus having a psychopath who just wants to kill people because it's Friday. A lot of things that I don't see conveyed very well in certain elements of fiction is the cause of the villain. So, you know, what is it that, you know, we already know that they're doing bad things, right? Why are they doing the bad things? Is it because of religion? Is it because of politics? Is it a personal slight? If we take a look at Seven, the villain in there was doing things for a religious thing. He saw sins everywhere, and he was going to set the example, and he was just, you know, to him, he was just kind of bringing to light all the other things. You know, and then are they trying to do something that they think is for the greater good? Thanos is like a really big villain right now, and he wanted to destroy half the population of everything because he was worried about the natural resources. Or is what they're doing triggered by an event or the circumstances that they're finding themselves into? Magneto from X-Men is a really good example about this, because first off, he was persecuted, he was treated badly, and so he was just done with it. And you kind of feel for him, and that's part of what we're trying to do with our villains, is that we're trying to have our readers identify with them, or at least understand their cause. Like, that's a really big important element. And a lot of the motivations that I'm actually seeing for villains right now, they're weak. Let's go to The Mummy. Alright, the Mummy, the first Mummy, not the other two. We're not going to talk about those. But the Mummy, and he comes back and he wants to bring his true love. I'm saying that in quotes, because what did she do at the end? She fucking ran. Not true love. I am really tired of the whole true love thing, where it's just like, I'm going to do all these evil things because I love, and love, and love, and love. Love is replaceable. Do you see how many times people get married, divorced, married again, find love again, date again? The whole concept of a one true love is so rare that it really upsets me, because it's overdone in books. Y'all done with this. Another thing to consider, and I really hate this, mannerisms. Like, it's either overdone or it's not done at all. Do they pick their fingers? Do they have like a tick? And what's their word choice? Are they educated? Are they not educated? Are they street smart? You know, are they impulsive? Do they plan what they're going to do? How can you show that? I think one of the characters that I actually really ended up liking came from Baby Driver, and that was Bats. Bats was just complete chaos. You know, he was impulsive, he did things because he wanted to, and he didn't care about what the repercussions were afterwards. Bats was a pure, impulsive, needs-driven character, and I thought that that was great. Something that I would like to encourage you to consider is, if you're going to make them impulsive or not, you need to decide on their lifespan, because I can guarantee you, like, spontaneous, like, chaotic villains don't live very long, because they're not planning for things that are going to come. They're just kind of do it in the heat of the moment, what feels good, and they're probably going to die. Alright, and the last thing to consider when you're actually creating your villain is, how can you make them balanced with your character? So a lot of the conflict that comes from the story is trying to figure out how the good guys are going to beat the bad guys, and there's often a power struggle of some sort. A really good example, or sometimes there's an imbalance and you have to wonder about how these characters are going to defeat like the super huge character. A really good example about that is actually Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson, where this character had to use his wits to destroy this character that was way more powerful than he was. Like, there was no chance he was going to win. And the classic example, at least in the comic books, is the Joker and Batman. They are two separate sides, but they do balance each other. They're both very smart, they're ambitious, they're both driven, and they've got friends. Alright, so I gave you guys some really basic stuff when trying to create your villains, which seems like a lot, but it's not. I mean, if you really want to go through the extra effort and do the 365, character question thing to help you flesh out your person, that's fine. Go ahead, do that. But I found that actually using those things that I talked about really helped me flesh out my character and figure out a balance between them and my hero. Now, here's the thing with your villain. Here's the thing. A story is made on your villain. If your villain is shit, your story is going to be shit too. And it's going to show a lot in the plot line, because if you're just using this to kind of like provoke the character, using it as a plot device, then it's no good. It's literally no good. And readers are going to pick up on that right away. One of the things I really hate about a lot of the villains I'm kind of reading about right now in literature is just how one-dimensional they're coming off as. When I decided to actually write my series, is I wanted to create a villain that at the end of the day, that readers were going to sit there and be like, okay, yeah, I get it. Here's the match to help burn the world. I'm there with you. What I would really encourage you to do as a writer is, when you make your villain, this is the key thing. When you make your villain, make them so that way you want to go have a beer with them. Alright? Make it so that way when you're sitting down and you're talking to them, you find yourself agreeing with what they're saying. Those are the villains that people absolutely love. They want to have a villain that creates some kind of reader conflict that kind of makes them go like, well, that's a bad thing to do, but I understand why you're doing it, and now I'm not so sure. You really do want to challenge your readers that way, because like I said before, a lot of them are very one-dimensional, mustache twitching, doing it to kind of just create conflict for the sake of conflict, because we couldn't figure out anything better to do. One of the other things I definitely want to talk about is something that I see that pops up in writing group every now and then, and it's creating a story without a villain. Can this be done? Yes, it can be done. But if you're going to make your villain basically like an aspect of society, or you're going to make it an idea or a concept, you gotta be really careful with that, because a lot of people do enjoy reading like a thing that can be physically conquered, if that makes any sense. And while your story doesn't need to actually have like a physical bad guy, so to speak, it does need to have something that your hero is going to be able to, overcome, some kind of physical representation. Like, you don't have to kill it. That doesn't need to be a thing, but it definitely needs to be something that's overcome in a satisfying way that the reader walks away with. But does your story actually need to have a bad guy to make it like something that's worth reading? And the answer is, it depends. I can't say a yes or no. That's like you coming to me and saying, Carol, I don't know what to do with my hair. What should I do with it? I don't know your hair. I don't know if you have C4 hair or wavy hair, if it's curled, if you bleached it 5 times. Like, I don't know enough to give you a concrete answer. What I do know is that you have to consider what's best for your story, and then what's best for your reading audience as well. What genre are you writing? What are typically seen in those? Do you think you can actually pull off what you're going to do? There's no way I could say yes, no, maybe. It just depends. I've seen some talented writers write a story that didn't actually have a villain to overcome, where it was more like a personal conflict, like Hatchet. Hatchet was a really good one for that. And I've seen some that tried to do that and it turned out horrible, and I'm not going to name those books because I don't want that fan base to come after and tell me what a horrible person I am for having an opinion. But ultimately, it does come down to what kind of conflict that you have in your story, and conflict and creating conflict is definitely another video I'm going to do right now. It's going to take way too long to do at this particular moment, but it's coming. I promise. It's coming. And, you know, the kind of villain that you write really depends on the story that you're doing too. So for example, shameless plug right here, I have a short story that's out. You can either pay 99 cents for it or you can sign up for my newsletter and get a free copy of it. I do have a mini villain in there that Ghost has to go ahead up against. And even in that short time that you see with that character, you can immediately tell what their grievances are, their motivations, and you can even pick up a little bit of their mannerisms. That's a really good example. Again, it's free if you sign up for the newsletter. You want to give me some pennies, you can go pay for it on Amazon. I'll put links down below for you. I'm all here for you. And that is it on the villain talk, which, you know, really long video. I really appreciate your patience and diligence and wanting to be part of this. Having said that, I do want to have a discussion about what villains that you saw were the best villains, and I also want to have a discussion about the worst ones. And I'm going to know about the qualities, not like I hated them because they were shallow. Like, you know, go a little bit deeper. Like, what about their actions made them shallow? What about these characters like rubbed you the wrong way? Just so that way people can kind of take a look and see what people like and dislike and things like that. And that concludes our talk. If you would like to follow me on social media, please do. I have all the links down below. If you would like to hear more about my comment, please subscribe, hit the bell button. That way you can follow me and know when the videos are coming out. I do come out with them on Fridays. And if you like to, you know, engage and chat with me, I'm very active on Twitter. If you like to see little pictures that I draw, I do that on Instagram. I'd love to have you part of that network with me, and I look forward to seeing you guys all next week. Ooh, somebody mentioned me in a story. Yes, Instagram stories. Fucking love that. Oh my god, this is so hard. Brittany!